On October 29, 1929, by far one of the most infamous events took place, the crash of the American stock market, which had signaled the beginning of the Great Depression. The day of this event would be referred to as Black Tuesday. This tragic event would foreshadow the coming years of the country's economic downturn.
By 1932, 1/4 of the American workforce was unemployed. Herbert Hoover's efforts to save the decimated American economy were doomed.
But in 1933, a new man would step up to the challenge, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
FDR's aggressive call to action became known as the New Deal. In this trip, you will not only visit famous places that were built as a part of the New Deal, but you will also experience a more down-to-earth perspective of how civilian lives were affected. Join us as we take a leap back in time and visit the time period of the New Deal.
Beginning in 1932, during the Democratic Convention, FDR would say, "I pledge myself a New Deal for the American people." These few words would change the course of history for the United States.
In his first 100 days of presidency, he brought quick and drastic changes, and Congress cooperatively passed most of his bills. He helped businesses, agriculture, the unemployed, and those in risk of losing their property. All of the programs under the New Deal dealt with the 3 R's, known as relief, recovery, and reform.
For the first portion of the New Deal, we will visit the signing of the Banking Act of 1933, which took place in the White House's Oval Office in Washington, D.C. Part of the establishment of the FDIC was planned here, known as the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. In 1933, the purpose of the FDIC was to maintain public confidence and encourage stability in the financial system. This was achieved through the advocacy of safe banking practices. While you are here, you will be able to get a glimpse of what it was like to be around the signers of the Banking Act.
In 1933, we will visit Rocky Top, Tennessee. One of FDR's most important and notable creations during the first 100 days was of the TVA, or the Tennessee Valley Authority. The TVA helped spur economic growth, electricity, and modernization within the region. One of the most famous dams in the region is Norris Dam. The dam was named after the Nebraska Senator George Norris for his active role in the creation of the TVA. There were many parks created around the vicinity of Norris Dam, making it a famous tourist spot and eventually becoming a major component of the Tennessee state parks.
On day 2 of our trip, we will visit one of the main areas impacted by the CCC. The CCC, also known as the Civilian Conservation Corps, was a work relief program that provided jobs for young men that were unskilled and unemployed. This was one of the most popular organizations to come about FDR's New Deal. The men worked on many projects regarding the conservation of natural resources. Not only did this provide jobs, but the CCC also helped bring public awareness of the conservation of natural resources and raise the morale of young workers. As a result, hundreds of parks were created, many were updated, and over 3 billion trees were planted. The Cuyamaca Rancho in California is an example of the CCC's commitment to natural conservation.
Next, our trip will bring you to Walker County, Alabama. Extra benefits for lowering production, where surplus is present, or reducing land/acreage were given to farmers through the Agricultural Adjustment Act. The Agricultural Adjustment Act managed and oversaw the supply of the main crops in the agricultural industry. A few of them were corn, wheat, cotton, rice, peanuts, and tobacco. The act also helped farmers that were impacted by the Dust Bowl, ruining their crops. The farm in Walker County, Alabama, was one of the farms affected by the Agricultural Adjustment Act.
At the end of day 2, we will go to Tukwila, Washington. We are visiting the site of the Tukwila School. The school is built as a result of the FERA, also known as the Federal Emergency Relief Association. The FERA was a program that was started by Hoover but continued into FDR's administration. FDR gave loans to states in order to help operate relief programs.
On day 3 of our trip, we will visit Roosevelt Care Center in Edison, New Jersey, which was built in 1935. The name alone can hint its roots, from FDR's Works Progress Administration. Known as the WPA, it was similar to the CCC in providing jobs to the unemployed and unskilled people that were mostly men. But instead of raising awareness about natural conservation, they focused on the construction of public buildings and works. For example, young men along with supporting artists built bridges, roads, and other public buildings. The WPA is one of the biggest agencies, hiring over 3 million workers.
Following our visit to the Roosevelt Care Center, we will be going to New York City on September 13, 1933. On this date, the National Recovery Administration held a parade down Fifth Avenue for 10 hours, with the New York City mayor declaring a half-day of work for all the participants. The organizer of the parade is Hugh S. Johnson, the NRA administrator. Keep your eyes open for the Blue Eagle, which is the NRA's official symbol.
After visiting the New York National Recovery Act Parade, we are going to Central Fire Station in Hilo, Hawaii. The Public Works Administration was led by Secretary of Interior Harold L. Ikes and was created by the National Industrial Recovery Act in June of 1933. The PWA provided the funds for construction of many places, one of which was the Central Fire Station. By the end of construction, nearly half of the funding of the fire station was provided by the PWA.
On day 4 of our trip, we will visit the Supreme Court in 1937. This was during the Stewart Machine Company v. Davis court case. The Stewart Machine Company challenged the Social Security Act of 1935, claiming that the tax for the act was unconstitutional. It violated the 10th Amendment, which states that power not given to the federal government is given to the state and people. Others also cited the act as a violation of the 5th Amendment. However, in a 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court upheld the tax under the Social Security Act, stating it to be constitutional.
During the Great Depression, the Works Progress Administration created the Federal Theater Project, employing actors. During this time, Orson Welles was one of the most famous actors and directors. Some of his famous works include Macbeth and Faustus. Government employed artists of all kinds, including musicians, actors, dancers, and photographers. Some artists helped paint pictures used in posters and endorsing government agencies from the New Deal and calling for action, such as the CCC and WPA posters. Not only did this help improve the lives of many artists, but also it helped promote American culture.
On day 5 of our trip, we will visit the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. There we will see the signing of the Emergency Relief Appropriations Bill. The bill itself provided $5 billion to create jobs for the unemployed. Here you will be able to see the bill itself and its supporters. The Emergency Relief Appropriations Bill led to the Emergency Relief Appropriation Act of 1935, which had also signified the beginning of the second 100 days and the Second New Deal.
After that, we will visit the introduction of another paramount act of FDR's Second New Deal, the National Labor Relations Act of 1935. It was also abbreviated as the NLRA, and the Wagner Act was another name for the act. The act was partially named after Senator Robert F. Wagner, a Democrat from New York who was a chief proponent of the U.S. labor laws. The purpose of the National Labor Relations Act was to protect the rights of the employer-employee relationship, promote collective bargaining, and to enforce the reduction of private sector labor and management practices. To end day 5, we will be visiting FDR's most famous park, Roosevelt Park.
During the Great Depression, the WPA created jobs by hiring unemployed workers towards the major developments and improvements of the park, which is named after him. In 1937, the WPA hired renowned ceramic sculptor Wayland Gregory to produce a sculpture for the park. The result was Light Dispelling Darkness, which would become one of his most famous works of all time and which still stands today.
On the morning of day 6, we will be visiting the Securities and Exchange Commission headquarters in Washington, D.C. The Public Utilities Holding Company Act was also known as the Wheeler-Rayburn Act. The act required that all side businesses be kept independent and differentiated from the regulated business. The act also regulates the mother companies of electric and gas utilities, disallowing the owners to raise the prices and disallowing speculation. Another purpose for this act was a congressional response to suspicious, huge utility holding companies and their practices during the 1920s and 30s. Following the Public Utilities Holding Company Act is the Banking Act of 1935.
The Banking Act of 1935 changed the entire concept of the Federal Reserve. Each of the 12 district banks would maintain a separate interest rate. This would best serve the financial interests in the region to avoid another economic decline. An example was the Panic of 1907, the aftermath of the San Francisco earthquake, where massive cash flowed from east to west. It restructured the Federal Reserve Board by changing their titles to Board of Governors, with the leader being called the Chairman of the Board of Governors and everyone else being given the title of Governors. Such a move was aimed towards giving them more independence from the executive branch. Since in other countries at the time, the main decision maker in a bank has the title Governor.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt was known mostly for his famous Fireside Chats, a series of 30 radio addresses from Roosevelt between 1933 and 1944, explaining changes and policies to the citizens. During the Great Depression, his chats were crucial in keeping the American morale high. Fireside Chats made communication from the president to the people easier, and it increased his popularity as well. For this trip, you'll be hearing his Fireside Chat about banking at a house in Washington, D.C.
Everyone wants a special promotion in 2014, so there's no doubt you want one in 1933. Being the good and obedient tourist who decided not to alter history, we've decided to treat you with a special stay at the Lincoln Bedroom in the White House.
Now time for a special treat. During FDR's presidency, the White House housekeeper, Henrietta Nesbitt, said that FDR enjoyed indulging in fruitcake. Don't worry, it's not too late yet, and Roosevelt will be there to greet you at the north entrance along with some tea.